ranked choice voting is also going to force politicians to be better at politics, right? Because now they're going to have to go in. Well, now I can't just go into the white woman suburban, right? And now I have to reach out to Latinos. Now I have to reach out to Bernie's voters because they may be their second choice. So I have to give them something.
On our segment, Making Voters Smarter, I'm going to go to my man Gabe, who's going to give you a rundown.
One of the biggest problems we have in the United States is the two-party system. After any election, about half of the country feels like they lost. And that's led us to polarization, where every party thinks the other party is going to lead to the death of American democracy. There's no room for discussion, no room for nuance, no room for cooperation unless it's for the military-industrial complex or for corporation. Right now, we have a situation over the last 30 years since Bill Clinton that the Democrats have essentially become the Reagan Republicans of the decade prior, and the Republicans have morphed into something unrecognizable where any point that is not a Republican point is communism or socialism. So our two options right now are 80s conservatives that are the Democrats or far-right authoritarian. And it's really, really difficult for any third party to gain support. Voting your conscience, like I did in 2016 for the Green Party, is shamed. You're called a spoiler. You're called somebody who is entitled and doesn't care about people. And when Hillary lost in 2016, they blamed Bernie Sanders and Jill Stein, absolving themselves of any blame, regardless of the fact that Jill Stein voters were a tiny fraction compared to the Gary Johnson voters who were more Republican leaning, and ignoring that more Bernie Sanders voters voted for Hillary Clinton than Hillary Clinton voters voted for Barack Obama. So now we get into the topic of today, which is ranked choice voting. What is ranked choice voting? Some people also call it single transferable vote, but in a nutshell, it is a system where instead of voting for your preferred candidate, whether it's for Congress, whether it's for the presidency, you rank your candidates in order of preference. So if it was me in 2016, I would have ranked Jill Stein number 1. I would have ranked probably Hillary Clinton number 2, Gary Johnson number 3, and then Donald Trump number 4. So based off of that ranking, how does the election take place? What happens is they count all the votes on the first ballot. Then if no candidate receives 51%, because you can only end the vote when somebody gets 51%, the lowest scoring candidate, the lowest vote candidate is taken out. And those ballots are revisited and you look at their number 2 choice. So now those number 2 choices are added to the totals for the remaining candidates. Then nobody still has the 51% required. You go to the third choice candidates and so on and so on. So there's really no argument against this vote. It seems like if you want to be in a country where it's not just polar opposites, you want more candidates and more opinions and more things like that. So ranked choice voting off the bat would eliminate the spoiler vote. It would eliminate the problems that anyone can complain. It would eliminate the voter shaming. Everyone could vote for policies and candidates that they truly back versus trying to figure out what is the most pragmatic candidate that I can back, who's more likely to win, etc. And I think that's what happened in latest primary cycle with states like South Carolina, where you have people voting for a pragmatic candidate. It allows voters that have been disenfranchised by the two-party system, who don't believe they even have a voice, to come in and start getting more inspired that they may make a change. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, one, this ranked choice voting system is something that exists around the world in some way or another. So some countries have parliamentary systems where it might not be the exact ranking the way that we discussed it, but they have what's called proportional representation, where based on the number of votes you get, that's the amount of representatives you get in the House. Here in the United States, we have what's called a winner-take-all system. So if you win 50.01% of the vote and the other person is 49.0, you're going to get that seat and 100% of the delegates or whatever, if it's the electoral college. That's not really the way that it should run. You know, you should have proportional representation based on the number of votes. So going forward there's multiple elections in history where ranked choice voting could have changed that. We talked a little bit about the 2016 election, but the most notable example nationally is the 2000 election, where George W. Bush beat Al Gore, and it is the birth of what was called the Nader effect, where Ralph Nader of the Green Party was blamed for Al Gore losing Florida. what happened then was people were voting their conscience in many cases, and they liked Ralph Nader and they voted for him. But what's ignored by that is that 12% of Democrats actually voted for Bush versus the 1.6% that Nader got. And it's just something that we have to look at. If there was ranked choice voting, many people could have voted for Nader, but then all of their second votes would have gone to Gore, or most of them. If we want to look at the more recent election, 2016, which I spoke about earlier, if you took out all of Jill Stein's voters and you took out all of Gary Johnson's voters, it actually helps Trump, which is crazy because Gary Johnson got 3% of the vote nationally. Jill Stein only got 1% nationally. So the only scenario where Jill Stein voters could have helped Clinton is if Gary Johnson stood in the race and only Jill Stein got out, which is a very unlikely scenario. So
Gabe, I started looking at arguments against it. I guess the most kind of in-depth article I found was from the Heritage Foundation, where Jeannie Thomas, Clarence Thomas' wife, did a lot of work for, including in the 2000 election, like we mentioned in a different video. And he didn't recuse himself. But anyway, I digress. Other reasons are kind of knocked down. They're like, they just want to say anything. You know, one of the reasons they mentioned was like, at the end, somebody that doesn't get a majority will win. Somebody that does not get a majority will win. That means if somebody doesn't get a, they mentioned an Oakland election where I think, let me see, basically nobody got the majority in the first place votes, but the person who won had 25,000 second place votes, would put them way over the line to win. So the majority, like the guy that had the most majority votes, ended up not winning. And they said, well, and a solution to this is doing a runoff election. We're like, hold up. I mean, the ranked choice voting, when it's not the parliamentary system, it already includes this like automatic runoff election. So it makes no sense for them to use that example. They talk about how it might take too long to happen. Well, only if you don't have to do a whole bunch of runoffs. It could be just the same as a regular election majority, but then if you have to do a bunch of runoff elections, it could potentially be faster to just count instead of have people coming back to the ballot again and voting again to do the runoff. So it undermines one of the other arguments. So, I mean, they just they call it a gimmick, but it's basically because it's not beneficial to the way the system is right now. And, if anything, they always love the status quo.
I want to highlight two elections over the last 2 years where ranked choice voting would have helped in the districts tremendously. First one is in my home district of Florida 27. In 2018, this is 2 years into Trump, there was a very heated primary in the Democratic Party. There were 4 progressive candidates. David Richardson, who was a Florida state representative, or you had Kristen Rosen-Gonzalez, Matt Hagman, and Michael Hepburn, who was a brand new Congress / Justice Democrat. So 4 progressive challengers. Establishment candidate was Donna Shalala. Donna Shalala was part of the Clinton administration. She was on the board of United Health. She was the quintessential centrist corporatist candidate. So during the debates, which I went to live, Donna Shalala never showed up. You had these 4 progressives debating each other over who was more progressive.
Wow.
And the one thing they agreed with was they all hated Donna Shalala, and she was literally the worst. They all said, I would support anyone on this stage over Donna Shalala. And then what happened in the primary? Donna Shalala won by 5 points. And I'm going to give you the vote breakdown just so you can see how preposterous this is. You have Donna Shalala, 31.9%, essentially 32%, call it. David Richardson, 27.5%. Kristen Gonzalez, 17.5%. Matt Hagman, 16.9%. And then Michael Hepburn, who I voted for, 6%. So if you only took Michael Hepburn out, you get enough to beat Shalala. And he was the lowest earning candidate. If you added every candidate together, I think it's almost 70% of the vote.
Wow. What you're saying is your fault?
I think it's our fault as progressives, because we need to unite and we need to figure this thing out, and we need to read the tea leaves and come to agreements, just the way that they did in 2020 right now for the Democratic Party, how the centrists united and they all dropped out and they made their agreements. We need to get better at that. So
I think that's separate from ranked choice voting. It's about consolidating at the end, the same way that they did for Biden against Bernie.
Well, it is also ranked choice voting, because if for example, if Michael Hepburn was taken out as the 4th candidate, as the lowest scoring candidate, most of his votes would have went to any of the others.
Right, but what I mean is, we know that we're not going to have any help from the Democratic establishment to get disconnected. So we could have the same kind of consolidation without having ranked choice voting. But what I want to say about ranked choice voting specifically is that it's not only for us progressives. It could help Republicans too, because there's a lot of Republicans that hate they talk about the Washington leaders, whatever, and they could use ranked choice voting in their own elections in their own states. I mean, imagine, I don't know the breakdown right now, but imagine how many people would have had that didn't vote for Trump, could have had Romney or somebody else as the second choice, and they could have won and beat Trump in their primary, So I'm sure the Republican establishment would have been happy, and the Democratic establishment would have been happy with that. It's something that it crosses party lines because it doesn't limit your choices to just the lesser of two evils. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So Republicans deal with that as well. So instead of framing it this way for us, we got to frame it for the people.
Difference between asking people to consolidate, which I'm for trying to consolidate and be better in strategy, but it also doesn't limit us. If you have two people that both are around 30%, why should one of them drop out? Maybe one can win with 31, one could win with 32. So in that case, it doesn't make sense to ask somebody to take a seat in this, but that regardless, one of them is going to win based off of the ranked choice voting, because it allows them both to stay in the race and not be spoilers for
it. I just mean that ranked choice voting is a harder pull, a harder accomplishment than just having more cohesion.
Ranked choice voting is also going to force politicians to be better at politics, right? Because now they're going to have to go in. Well, now I can't just go into the white woman suburban, right? And now I have to reach out to Latinos. Now I have to reach out to Bernie's voters because they may be their second choice. So I have to give them something.
I have to reach out to the factory workers in Michigan. I have to reach out to the rural voters. You got to reach out to everybody. So it helps everybody. And then maybe we could have a little bit of, less division. Democrats they don't do it as much, but just focus on a small sliver of a base to get you just over the line. Well, this way you have to cater to everybody and eventually be the president for the entire country and not just your racist base.
Yeah, the Patriot Act had a clip. They covered ranked choice voting, and they showed a advertisement that it actually two candidates did a joint advertisement.
Hello, I'm Mark Eves.
And I'm Betsy Sweet. And in this upcoming governor's race, we are competitors, but we have been longtime allies.
On June 12th, you can vote for me first and Betsy second,
or me first and him second. And you can be assured that we will have a strong progressive leader and we will all move forward together.
And they said, hey, vote for me on the first ballot, but give the second choice to the other person. And then that other person said the same thing in reverse. And you see more camaraderie amongst candidates, probably amongst moderates, or, also you're going to see less negative voting in that instance. Go ahead, Gabe.
In my research, it came across that a positive benefit is less negative campaigning overall. Because you're scared of losing the other person. So it goes exactly with what you both are saying. And this Florida election is not the only one. More recently, in 2020, we had Massachusetts' 4th congressional district where the exact same thing happened. And you would be surprised at the amount the person who won by. So in this race, you had even more candidates than in my election. You had 9 candidates. The winning candidate, who is a corporate Dem, won with only 22% of the vote.
Wow.
22%. The next 4 candidates were all progressives, all Medicare for all Green New Deal. The highest scoring one was 21.1%. So you have the person who won 22.4%. The next highest 21.1%. So the winner was Jake Auchincloss, and the runner-up was Jesse Mermel. And then after that, the next runner-up was 18%. So within the top 3% is only a couple of percentage points. So if those people got together and had a discussion, or if we had ranked choice voting, which is what we're pushing for in this segment, break down the combination of all the corporate Dems was only 35% in this vote. And the combination of all the progressives was over 60%. So we have to get better, either by ranked choice voting or by just getting smarter and talking to each other and not letting these corporatists beat us like this. So
yeah, that was the race that Joe Kennedy III, he's not eligible of going back for his seat. That was his seat, and when he ran for Senate, he had to give up that seat. I would like to see a framework, the same way I haven't came up with an exact framework, but the same way we have the People's Gauntlet that's for vetting candidates. I really am racking my head of how we can come up with a framework so that progressives can somehow know whether it's a month, 2 months before the primary date, that we figure out a way to just consolidate. So for example, in the Joe Kennedy's race, we know that there was 4 people who advocated for Medicare for all, which is my personal litmus test on if you're a progressive or not. And we would say, okay, who's polling the lowest? If you're polling the lowest by this date, we need you to drop out and endorse. We'll make whatever deal you want to cut. You want to be chief of staff. I'm throwing something out there. We have to come up with some kind of framework.
And to wrap up the segment, so progressive policies are the most popular policies in the country. This isn't an opinion. This is a fact based off of multiple polls from going back to 2015 until now. So when you look at on an issue by issue basis, for example, getting money out of politics, according to Pew Research in 2018, 77% of voters believe in getting money out of politics, but we're nowhere near that. Medicare for all, in the most recent Hill Harris X poll, was 70%. And in the most recent Kaiser Family Foundation poll was 56%, which is still pretty high. Mm-hmm. Then you have cannabis legalization, 69% as of November 2019 in another Pew Research poll. So the issues themselves poll way over 50%. And if we believe in our issues, we also have to come up with solutions like ranked choice voting that can allow the voters to vote for their conscience. And ultimately, the goal is get these issues passed, because we don't care about individual candidates. We care about policy, and we care about progressing the country forward.
All right, everybody, let us know in the comments below. Are you against ranked choice voting? Do you see any disadvantages to it? And also, if you have any ideas for a framework for consolidating on the candidates, I would love to hear that. We're going to make this thing happen. It's me and you and the political junkies. We're all political junkies together. We're going to change the system. Let's do it together.